Okay, so you're ready to tackle a project, right? Maybe building a bookshelf, something like that. You've got your lumber picked out, but then it hits you. You got to cut those 2x4s.
Yeah.
And not just any old way. You want those cuts clean, precise, maybe even a little fancy.
Exactly.
Choosing the right saw. That's where it all begins.
It really is. It's like choosing the right kitchen knife. I mean, you wouldn't use a butter knife to carve a turkey, would you?
Throw away.
Each saw has its strength.
For sure.
And understanding those, that's what's going to help you get those results you're after.
Absolutely. And that's what we're diving into today. We've been looking at this article from Tigerfish Tools.
Okay.
And they really break down all the different options. We're talking power saws, we're talking hand saws.
Yeah, the whole shebang.
The whole shebang. But before we even get to specific saws,
right,
they emphasize this difference between crosscuts and rip cuts. And I got to admit, I've definitely mixed those up before.
Oh, it's a common woodworking, I don't know, conundrum, I guess you could say. Yeah.
Think about your 2x4, right? A crosscut. That's like you're slicing a loaf of bread.
Okay.
You're cutting across that wood grain.
Right.
You're making the board shorter. But a rip cut, that's slicing the loaf lengthwise. You're going with the grain to make, longer, thinner pieces.
Okay. So if I'm shortening a 2x4 to, like, fit a specific shelf height, that's a crosscut.
Yes.
If I want to, like, trim down the width to make it thinner,
that's a rip cut.
That's a rip cut.
Yeah. And just like you'd use a serrated knife for bread, you want a saw that's made for the specific cut you're going for.
That makes sense. All right, so let's fire up those power tools, because I am always a sucker for that satisfying whir of a saw. Where do we even start?
Well, I think the article starts off with the classic, the circular saw.
Yeah.
Versatile, powerful. It's often the go-to for 2x4s.
For good reason. It can make quick work of a crosscut. But how do you make sure that those cuts are, like, super straight? I've definitely had my fair share of wobbly cuts with a circular saw. Oh, yeah. For those laser straight cross cuts, you're going to want to use a guide. So you can use like a simple straight edge clamped to your 2x4.
Okay.
But for rip cuts, where you're cutting along the length of that board, you might want to build what's called a jig.
A jig, okay.
Imagine this, like a simple sled-like platform. It guides your circular saw along a perfectly straight track, ensures a smooth, accurate cut every time.
Oh man, a jig. Now that's working smarter, not harder.
I like it.
Okay, so circular saw, check. What about its bigger, more intimidating cousin, the table saw?
Now we're talking. Table saws, they're fantastic for both cross cuts and rip cuts, but they do require a bit more, maybe, caution, know-how.
Right.
They're all about that precision. For those perfect 90-degree cross cuts, you can't go wrong with a cross-cut sled.
A cross-cut sled, what is that?
Game changer. Picture this. A sturdy platform that glides across your table saw.
Okay.
And it's guided by tracks on either side. You secure your 2x4 to the sled, push the whole thing through. And it gives you a perfectly straight crosscut, no more wobbly lines.
I like it. I like it a lot.
And then for rip cuts, the table saw's secret weapon, that's the miter gauge, it slides in a groove on the table saw, and that gives you really precise control over the angle of your cut.
Oh man, I can already see the possibilities.
Yeah.
But with that much power, I imagine safety's like paramount.
Oh, absolutely.
I may or may not have had a minor mishap or two with the table saw back in the day.
Yeah, you're not alone there. The article really emphasizes safety, the importance of keeping a firm grip on the wood as it's going through the saw, always using those safety guards, eye protection.
Of course.
Never get complacent around a table saw.
Good advice. Good advice. So we've got saws for straight cuts. What about angles? What if I wanted to add some, some decorative trim to my bookshelf at let's say a 45-degree angle?
For that, you'd need a miter saw.
Okay.
They are specifically designed for making those angle cuts with precision.
Nice.
Crown molding, picture frames. Even those fancy mitered corners on your bookshelf, miter saw is your best bet.
Okay, so it's all about those crisp, clean angles. But the article did mention a word of caution about miter saws. Something about not using them for rip cuts.
Exactly. They excel at angles, but using a miter saw for a rip cut can be honestly dangerous. The blade's position, it makes it more likely to bind.
Yeah.
And that can cause what's called kickback. And trust me, you do not want to be on the receiving end of that.
No, not at all. So remember, everybody, choosing the right tool for the job, that's crucial, both for your safety and the quality of your work.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So we've got circular saws, table saws, miter saws. That's a lot of power. What about something a little more, old school?
I mean, like hand saws.
Yeah, like hand saws.
Don't underestimate the power of a well-chosen hand saw.
Okay, but hold on. Before you dismiss hand saws as, old-fashioned.
Right.
Let's talk about why they're making a huge comeback. I'm intrigued.
Okay.
So handsaws. I'll be honest, my experience is mostly limited to that old rusty one in my dad's toolbox. Is there really that much to say about them?
More than you might think. This article, they dive into a couple of handsaw, I guess, heavy hitters.
Okay.
The rip saw and the back saw. And remember how we were talking about cross cuts and rip cuts?
Right.
Each of these saws is designed to excel at one of those.
Okay, so a rip saw is for rip cuts.
You got it. A rip saw, that's like the workhorse of the handsaw world.
Okay.
It's got those big, aggressive teeth, designed to slice through those wood fibers with the grain, perfect for taking down a 2x4's length. And here's the surprising fact. Sometimes a handsaw can be faster than, even setting up a power saw for a few quick cuts.
And I'm guessing a lot quieter, too.
Oh, yeah.
Which my neighbors would definitely appreciate. I can see why they're making a comeback.
For sure.
What about the back saw? That name makes it sound a little more, I don't know, delicate.
You could say that. The back saw, that's all about precision.
Got that sturdy metal spine along the top, and that gives it incredible stability for super straight cuts.
Nice.
Especially, if you're going for a fine finish.
They mention using it with a miter box for angled cuts, so it's kind of like the handsaw equivalent of a miter saw.
Precisely. If the rip saw is like the lumberjack of handsaws, the back saw is the cabinet maker.
I like it.
It's all about finesse, control. The article, they point out that those finer teeth on a back saw, those are key to creating a smooth finish, almost like you're sanding as you cut.
Oh, wow. That's pretty cool. So I'm starting to see that choosing between a handsaw and a power saw, it isn't just about the size of the job or how much muscle you want to put into it. It's about the type of cut and the level of precision you need.
Exactly. And sometimes a handsaw, it can even be the safer option.
Really?
Especially for beginners who are still getting comfortable with, power tools.
Right.
There's a lot less that can go wrong when you're, in control of that blade. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, I have to ask, they mentioned this finesse factor with the reciprocating saw. The one that always makes me think of, demolition crews?
Yes. The reciprocating saw.
Yeah.
It's definitely a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah.
But when it comes to 2x4s, finesse isn't exactly its strong suit.
So maybe not the best choice for my bookshelf project.
Well, it depends what kind of look you're going for.
Okay.
Think of it this way, right? A circular saw that's like using a chef's knife. Precise cuts, clean lines. Reciprocating saw, more like using a cleaver. It's going to get the job done, but it can be a bit rough around the edges.
I could see that. Okay, so for something like, I don't know, framing a wall where those rough edges aren't going to be seen.
Exactly.
Reciprocating saw could be a good choice. But for a bookshelf where I want those nice, clean cuts, maybe not so much.
You got it.
Okay, I'm with you.
Choosing the right tool for the job.
Right, absolutely. Choosing the right tool for the job.
And speaking of tools, there's one crucial factor that applies to both handsaws and power saws.
Okay.
One that can make or break your project.
You're going to say a sharp blade, aren't you?
Bingo. A sharp blade is, it's the foundation of a successful woodworking project, no matter what type of saw you're using.
Yeah, it seems so obvious when you say it like that.
Right.
But honestly, I've definitely been guilty of putting off sharpening my saw blades. It's not the most exciting part of woodworking,
Oh, I hear you. But trust me, using a dull blade, that's like trying to run a marathon with a backpack full of rocks.
Oh, man.
It makes everything harder, less efficient, and honestly more dangerous.
Right.
Sharp blade, on the other hand, it just glides through the wood, gives you those smoother cuts, less splintering, and a lot less strain on your arms.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like that saying a dull knife is more dangerous than a sharp one.
Right.
The same goes for saws.
Absolutely. And it's not just about safety either.
Right.
A sharp blade gives you a cleaner cut.
Yeah.
Which means less sanding later on.
Oh, less sanding. I like the sound of that.
Talk about a win-win.
Yeah, for sure. So we've covered a lot of ground here. From the raw power of a circular saw to, the quiet precision of a back saw.
We really have.
This whole deep dive has really made me rethink, my whole approach to even choosing a saw. It's not just about, grabbing the biggest, baddest tool in the shed.
Right. It's about understanding the nuances of each saw and choosing the one that best fits the task at hand, the material, your comfort level.
And speaking of comfort level, I mean, this article focused on cutting 2x4s, which That feels like a pretty good starting point for, a beginner like me.
Yeah.
But what if I'm working with, I don't know, different types of wood? Like you see those beautiful hardwoods that they use for furniture.
Oh, yeah.
Does it change things up at all?
Yeah, that's a great question. Just like you wouldn't use a bread knife to carve a roast chicken, you got to consider the wood itself when
Yeah.
choosing a saw.
Yeah.
Hardwoods, they've got those dense fibers,
Yeah.
and they can be tougher on blades, so you might need a saw with a little more power or even a different blade design.
So a saw that powers through a pine 2x4 might, like, struggle with a piece of oak.
Yeah, you might find yourself needing a saw with a higher tooth count for those hardwoods.
Okay.
Or even a specialized blade, designed for cutting through those dense fibers.
Right.
And don't forget about adjusting your cutting technique, too.
Oh,
Slow and steady wins the race when it comes to hardwoods.
this is making me realize there's so much more to woodworking than I ever really imagined.
Oh, for sure.
It's like a whole world.
It really is, yeah. And the more you learn, the more you realize how much more there is to discover, but that's part of the fun of it, right?
It is. It is. It's that journey.
Each project is a chance to kind of learn, refine your skills.
I like it. So as we wrap up this deep dive here,
Yeah.
into the world of cutting 2x4s and beyond, what's like the biggest takeaway that you hope our listener, walks away with today?
I think the most important thing is just to be thoughtful about your saw choices,
Yeah.
Don't just reach for the same old tool out of habit. Really consider the cut that you need, the finish you're going for, even the noise level you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
And of course, never underestimate the power of a sharp blade.
Words to live by.
Uh,
So next time you're facing a stack of lumber in a woodworking project,
Yeah.
take a moment, consider your options. You might be surprised what a difference the right saw can make.
I think so.
Happy woodworking, everybody.